Saab 93 ignition switch repair. With age, use and dirt and dust getting in these, this can be the cause of the key not turning in the ignition, or potentially a message on the SID that says key not accepted. And the single biggest reason for that is the contacts inside here getting dirty. So I'm going to show you how to take it apart, clean them up and put it back together again. Before we start taking it apart though, once you've got it out of the car, just make sure that it's clean. We don't want to be transferring any dirt from the outside of the article to inside where the electronics are. I'm using a microfiber cloth and a little meth. Don't go mad, just give it a clean down. A very important tool that you're going to need from a coffee shop, get yourself a couple of these wooden coffee stirrers and cut each one into quarters. On each edge there are 2 points where the white housing and the black base are clipped together. And because of the way it's tooled, in the base there are these little half moon holes where the clips go. So in all 8 positions, push a stick into the half moon hole, make sure it goes behind the white casing and push it down firmly against the moulded nodule on the clip. Do that in all 8 positions. Now, starting at one corner with a 4 or 5mm flat blade screwdriver, get the screwdriver in between the black plastic part and the white housing. Once you've got it in, you can turn it and the black part should start to come out of the white part, and gently work your way around. Separate the 2 parts. As you open it like that and it tries to spring apart, don't allow it to spring apart and spread out on your work surface, because in particular you don't want to lose this spring and slider. Now that we've got this apart, you can actually start to get a flavour for how this works. On the mechanical side, when you put your key into the keyhole, the end of the key fob presses on a button, which is what we just took out a few moments ago, and that in turn pushes this cam, moves this electrical contact. As those 2 contacts move along the board here in this position, the contact goes from the lock position, which is where the 2 contacts are across there, over to the unlock position where the contacts are there. And over the years, with use, this contact gets dirty and wears. You can see on this one there's even been a little bit of arcing where the contact moves across onto this upper pad. That causes deterioration of the electrical contact, which causes a high resistance connection. That is ultimately what prevents the key from turning. There is a solenoid in here which then allows the key to turn further to the other positions. And if that doesn't make proper electrical contact, then that solenoid doesn't release. And that ultimately is the root cause of the problem. As the cam turns with the key, it moves these sliders. And with the different contacts here in slightly different positions, that's how it detects the position that the key is in. Each position of the key makes a different combination of connections on the board. And that also leads me into another problem description. If an owner in the past has spilt coffee or food onto the ignition switch, and that's got down inside here, it can wash away the grease that is on the slider mechanisms, and of course any debris that comes in, and fine dust is included in the description of debris. That makes these sliders very difficult to move, or they may move one way and not come back under their spring pressure. See how they, if I push them that way, see how they come back on their own? Well, if they've got dust and debris under there, or any sticky coffee or coke or something, then they may stick in that position, which again might be a problem getting the key out, never mind getting it in. So what we want to do, amongst other things, is clean up these contacts. The PCB simply lifts out of this half, which will allow us to work on it. This is the reluctor ring, which communicates with the transponder chip in the end of the remote key. And it's that communication that allows the car to start. The actual remote transmission function of this is purely for the button functions. To make it a little easier to work on, these legs here, if you release them from their holes and then very carefully lift that corner of the reluctor ring, away it comes. We can put that off to one side to make sure we don't damage it. As it happens as well, this side of the board here is where you would put LEDs if you wanted to light up the words on the ISM itself, which in actual fact was a feature on 2003 model year, but was then deleted. Get yourself a Q-tip, a 100% cotton Q-tip, dip it in a little alcohol, use the end of the Q-tip and very gently rub on the contacts. Whatever else you do, don't use anything abrasive to rub on these contacts. The contacts have got gold on them, and it's only a few microns thick, and you could easily destroy them. Use a different Q-tip for each contact. And here's a before and after photograph as well to show you the difference. But in this after photograph, you can actually see where the edge of the contact pad has actually been rubbed away by the needle on the wipers. With your Q-tip and alcohol, do the same with these wipers, but wipe them in one direction only, this way, because if you try to wipe them the other way, you could easily snag it in your cotton and bend the blade all the way over the wrong way and snap it off, and then your whole ISM becomes useless. Now, before we put this back together, let's just do a little lubrication. Using one of your little sticks, pull back the white slider and hold it down with your thumb whilst lifting up the top end of the cam, pulling it over and sliding it down, and it comes away. Now we can clean up this whole area. You just have to take my word for it, because I just forgot to take a photograph of it for you. What a plonker. That whole area around there was rather dirty. Give the cam a clean. I used a microfiber cloth there rather than a cotton cloth, because it doesn't leave lint behind. It is possible to take this apart even further from here and get at the solenoid mechanism and everything that's under there. I did actually try it on another one, and it literally exploded on me. So I'm not going to do that with this. And again, with one of your sticks, split it in half, either with scissors or a knife, so that we can use this to perform some lubrication. Use some silicone grease or dielectric grease, essentially the same thing. Just put a very tiny amount of lubrication down in the area where the sliders slide. Slide the slider up and down a couple of times, just to spread it around a little, and do the same on all three. It really does only take a smear. What we don't want is we don't want to get it on the electrical contacts. And to make sure that we didn't, give your contacts a little wipe with some alcohol again. With one of your other sticks, don't do this with your fingers, lift those contacts ever so slightly to bend them up to about 30 degrees, because one of the problems that occurs with them too is that over time they bend backwards away from the board, or they relax towards the board if you prefer. When you get to putting it back on, you need to be sure you get the cam the right way about, and the underside that goes against the back surface there is the flat side. So put a little grease around the flat side and return it from whence it came. Waggle it a little bit, spread the grease around under there. Put a little grease just on the little ramp on the slider, and then put it in that way around with that little ramp pointing towards the white slider on the mechanism. Not forgetting, of course, to put the spring in before you do. And that should push up and down quite freely, and it should freely push that white slider and the cam when it does so. Now, in this white top half, what I'm calling the key rotator needs to be able to rotate freely and smoothly in that housing. Now, this one was extremely gritty and wasn't rotating at all freely, probably because of dust getting in through this little gap here, and maybe drinks being spilled on it in the past. So what I did on this one, with some brake cleaner, I gave it a spray through all the little gaps in the holder, and also down the side of the rotator on each side. What I found was, as the brake cleaner came through the mechanism and started to come out through this small gap here, it brought a heck of a lot of dust and dirt with it. Once I'd allowed that to dry for about 10 minutes or so in the sun, through all the same gaps, I sprayed a little white lithium grease, which also came out of this gap here. So I allowed the solvent from the grease to dry off, and then wiped off the excess from both sides and used a little meths on my cloth again just to clean this off and make it non-greasy again. I also sprayed a little white lithium grease in through that hole there. After each little spray, rotate this around 2 or 3 times, make sure the grease moves around, and now it operates pretty smoothly. Clean off any excess grease that's got down into the bottom of the housing. Also clean off any grease that gets down the inside of the keyhole. Don't forget to put the reluctor ring back onto the board. That pin there goes through that hole there, just above the M on the label, and the 2 connector pins also go through holes in the board. Make sure not to bend them by making sure that you put the reluctor ring back on square, and the little legs push down into the slots put the assembly back together, put the white housing down with the smile uppermost and the black housing with the 2 sliders uppermost, and hold the PCB so that the connector there is above that hole. Turn it upside down and place it into the white housing. Tip your black housing upside down. Just make sure that your push button doesn't drop out. Hopefully it should stay in place with the stiction from the grease you've applied. Check that your key rotator is in the lock position, and carefully place the 2 parts together squarely. Make sure that the push button is fitting into the keyhole properly from the back, and then squeezing from both sides, push it down as squarely as you can until it clips into place. Now we need to test that it's working freely, that it isn't sticking in any position. To do that, we need to defeat the interlock mechanism on the back here that is operated by this solenoid. Now, if you look very carefully, you can see the spring of the solenoid plunger and the plunger itself that goes through a hole in the key rotator and prevents it from rotating. So what you need to do is, with a suitable pick, pull back the spring and the plunger, and then with one of your little coffee sticks, push your little stick into the horizontal slot there. That will now prevent the plunger from going through the hole in the key rotator, and you should be able to put your key in and turn it to all directions. Use your little finger and just make sure that the plunger pushes down and springs back up freely. These are plug and play, so if you don't fancy doing this on the one that's in your car now, see if you can pick up a second-hand spare and clean that up first, and then you can swap the cleaned up one into the car. So if you got value from this video, please consider supporting the channel in some way, and I shall see you next time.